Hi, I'm Sarah Beth Goer.
And I'm Jennifer Jill Araya.
Welcome to the Crafting Audiobooks podcast, where we discuss the art and craft of audiobooks, and we aim to go deep quick.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sarah and I are so excited today. Our guest is fabulous. We've got with us today senior audiobook producer Jesse Bickford. Jesse, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. It is our pleasure and privilege. So let's dive right in. As I said, we are a podcast that goes deep quick, so we're going to do that. Jesse, I would love to know, what are the differences between the genres when you're casting them? How do you think about the genres, and how does that influence the way you cast?
That's a really interesting question. It's funny because it goes even a little bit more nuanced than just breaking down by genre, right? Because in every genre, there's you can have every sort of romance. You can have, different variations on the mystery thriller, on fantasy. And I think when I am starting to break down a book, I take pretty extensive notes just on my own as I'm working through the book, just to help my brain solidify the plot points and all that, and any characteristics or, yada, yada. But I try to begin a book for the first 100 pages or so just to get the atmosphere, just to get the feeling of it, just to listen to the author's words and the tone and the pacing. And if any characters have really big personalities right up at the front, obviously I kind of factor how that sits in, and I try to view it, I guess almost sort of cinematically. And then after I have the place and time and space of the book kind of in my head, that's when I start thinking about whose voice would best capture this tone. And, there's always so many people that could fill a role so wonderfully. And so I'll kind of start jotting down narrator names for people that I'm kind of keep in mind. But I try to keep my opinions pretty neutral until I know what the book is actually doing. Because you can get, almost all the way through a thriller, and at the very end, there's that surprise twist, which completely impacts the rest of the thing, right? So I try very hard to hear what the author's intent is, and that's sort of where it lives in my head. And so from genre to genre, things sound really different pretty quickly. But that doesn't mean that there's not crossover, obviously, things usually have a pretty similar tone when they're living in the same bubble. So I have, I try not to pigeonhole people into different genres. You can only be mystery thriller. You can only be romance. You can only be this. But I listen for tone more than anything. And that's what I try to base my casting off of.
That is so interesting. I think it's really, as you were talking, it was really striking me how much your process for casting imitates or mimics or is the same as my process for prepping. I mean, all of those things that you're looking for as you're figuring out who to cast for a book, those are all the same things that I'm reading for as I'm prepping a book, knowing that I'm going to narrate it, but needing to choose how to narrate it. So yeah, super interesting.
There's a little bit of a Venn diagram there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of Venn diagram there.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't realize.
I agree. It's really exciting to hear how deeply you dive into the author intent and the tone, and that informs it much more than genre. And of course, what I was hearing you say, of course, things that are of the same genre might have some tones in common, but it's really the individual book and the author's intent that you're sinking your teeth into. That's really exciting to hear. Speaking of that, there are, many different narrators who could fill a book beautifully. When you are doing auditions on a book and you're listening to the auditions, what makes one audition stand out over another in terms of, maybe you have several narrators, you thought they could all do a beautiful job. How are you discerning, this narrator in this moment?
Oh, gosh. So when I'm gathering samples, I usually am gathering them specifically because we have to send them off for approval from an outside source, be that the author or the print publisher, whoever it is. But I obviously review all of those before I send any along. And I think when one stands out specifically, it's when the narrator has hit the way that I read it. So whether that's pacing or inflection, or they picked up on a tiny little thing, they did maybe like 10 pages of just reading and then sent me the first 2 pages of it, but they informed their audition a little bit by getting just a little bit of backstory. I'd never expect anybody to read a whole book before they send me an audition. I know that they're all cold, but sometimes there's little things that are picked up on really, really early. And usually my favorite one ends up just being the one that like heard it the same way that I did, which is a little bit self-fulfilling, but it's Blackstone we pride ourselves on being able to parse text and hear what an author is trying to lay down. And the person that gets that, it just it's like in the first 5 minutes or first couple of seconds, I just say, oh, yes, they got it. They heard it. But then I will also still send like the same, the 3 samples to the author. And if they ask for my opinion, I give it. But usually I tend to send some excellent samples and just let the author choose who they hear, because it's their book that it doesn't matter what I've heard that's best, so.
Well, I have 2 follow-up questions to that, actually. This is all very intriguing to me. One is, that makes so much sense to me. Like, you have a clear point of view when you're digesting the book to explore even which narrators to reach out to. And so when you find the narrator that's a match to that point of view, that makes sense to me that you would be like, oh, well, that feels like the fit, right? Because it's filtered through your vision and your artistry as a casting director and a producer. But what I wonder is, like, is it ever appealing if somebody sort of surprises you, like, wow, they had such a specific take, but that wasn't what I envisioned, but ooh, I'm intrigued. Like, does that happen too?
Yes, absolutely. There have been several times where I've gotten auditions that sound nothing like what I was expecting, not what I was expecting from that narrator, not what I was expecting as a take on the read. And it's been like, no, that's even better than what I was thinking. And I'm delighted when that happens, because it's just cool to see in real time how text is interpreted. And there's no one right answer. I mean, there can oftentimes be very wrong answers in casting, but there's always so many right answers that it's delightful when I get an audition that I was not expecting.
That what I'm taking from that as an actor who auditions is to trust, the advice I've always heard, which is the good advice, which is like, listen, you can't read anybody's mind, so trust your vision, connect, be specific, and it'll match, what's meant to be cast in that moment, or it won't. But that's your work, is to show up that way. Yeah. And
so there have been a handful of times when the author has gone with the take that I wasn't expecting, and because that was the right one. And yeah, it's really an effort in just sticking to your guns and being like, no, I'm gonna perform this how I'm gonna perform this, and without having to worry about what my impression is. And that's why I don't give a lot of notes at the beginning. I might say, here's the book synopsis. It's this genre. Give me, the first 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is. But I don't give much more than that. If people ask me for more direction or for character notes or whatever, I'm happy to provide them, because I don't want to have anybody be handicapped by not knowing what I know about the whole book. But it's fun to just let people see what they come up with in the short amount of time that I'm requesting for the audition.
Thank you for that. My other follow-up question is, it sounds like when you're gathering samples, it's because the author would like to hear several options. And so I'm imagining otherwise, when the author doesn't need to hear samples, you're just casting with straight offers. Is that correct?
Every now and then, if I have a book that for whatever reason, I'm taking very, very handling with kid gloves, or it is my favorite thing that I've been working on all month and I want just the right voice for it, I might request samples for my own benefit. But I'm pretty familiar with I'm pretty comfortable being able to go to people's Audible samples and being able to hear how they would sound for the book. And it's delightful when I get to just cast a book. About 90% of our books require author approval over the narrator. So I get maybe 3 a month where I just get to cast them. And it's always just delightful. I'm like, no, I don't need a sample. Just, I want you to read it. It's a fun moment for me.
And so then what my real follow-up question was, in those cases when you are just you pick the narrator and hand them the book. How are you discerning then, when there are multiple narrators who could, like, is it just a gut feeling? Is it a combination of gut feeling and like who you've built great relationships with? Like, what is it there for you craft wise, really?
It is kind of a combination of a gut feeling and I probably wouldn't just give a book to somebody that I hadn't worked with before. Just say, hey, we've never collaborated ever. Here's this, and I just want you to read it. That's probably not the way I would go, just to add sort of a protective layer to our post team. I don't know, not knowing how that person interacts with other people or how they interact with our engineers or the comments they might have for our proofers. It's not a step that I would usually take. That said, it has happened and in the past, and it'll probably happen again. But it has a lot to do with just, I know that I know how this person works. I know what they sound like. I know their sensibility for this genre, or maybe it's a narrator that I've worked with for, many, many books, and they've only done romance for me. But they've said, I really want a mystery thriller. I really want a mystery. And I happen to have one. And I know because of that desire, that passion, that like, oh, I got it. I finally get to do this. I know the kind of care that they'll put behind the book.
Lovely.
What beautiful thoughts. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
My next question is one that you've already answered, so I'm going to wing it a little bit and ask something different than what we had planned. Jesse, I would love for you to share a project that you've worked on that you think truly exemplifies what stellar audiobook narration is and the craft of audiobooks in general, and why you think it's such a good example of what an audiobook should be.
I think it was last year. I worked on this book called Summer's End by Dana Melly. I'm being a bad producer and I can't remember how to say her name. But it was Lindsay Dorcas, Emily Lawrence, and Chelsea Stevens read this. And it is sort of a ghost story, a young adult coming of age, summertime ghost story. And these three women just nailed it. They each played a different character, and they collaborated with character voices and all that sort of stuff, but each of them leaned into their characters and their sections so well that from start to finish, I listened to the whole thing. I was on edge the whole time. I'd got like constant goosebumps. Our proofer that worked on it sent me an email, and he said, this is one of the best books in the 15 years that I've been proofing. These narrators nailed it. And it was just one of those books that it's just another one out, coming of age book in the sea of coming of age books, but they just got it. And everybody should go get that book. Everybody should put it on their to their listen.
That is awesome. I'm going to definitely have to listen to that. So when you were casting those three narrators, what about their voices meant to you that this is the role that they need to play? Because you can have those three narrators, but which part are they going to play? And,
right.
Obviously there's tons more narrators to choose from than just those three.
Yeah. A lot of it had to do with wanting to cast the characters authentically. But their three voices, not only did they have the right tone for these characters, one is sort of this snotty elite girl. The other one is sort of quieter, but, really determined. And when I heard their voices, I knew that they would play so well together, because it's especially when you're casting all the same gender of characters in the same, they're all like in high school and from the same area. So it's kind of, you have to figure out how to make them all sound distinct without making them sound completely, milquetoast the same. And the three of them just managed to find that balance beautifully. And I'm so proud of them for their work on it.
That's really cool. I love that you pointed out specifically with a multicast title, if you've got multiple narrators of the same gender, their voices could sound the same. So that's a consideration too. That's not necessarily something I thought about, but it's very true. You can't have the, two female characters sounding the same.
Yeah. And it's, especially, I can't recall, I'd have to look at the text for this one. And I couldn't remember if it was, you know, Emily, blah, 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 blah. And, in the manuscript layout. So having clear shifts in perspective were really important, especially because one of them was like the ghost of the whole thing. And yeah, it's just such a brilliant, a quietly brilliant piece of narration that the three of them collaborated on.
Oh, that sounds like it was a thrilling project to work on. Thank you for sharing that book recommendation. I'm going to have to listen to it.
And we are on to our very last question. And this is one that all three of us are going to answer. And I would love for you to begin, Jesse. The question is, what's exciting you about the craft right now, today?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Because I wear a lot of different hats, there's so many aspects of audiobook production that I'm excited about. I am excited about how much attention audiobooks have been getting in the past few years, which means people are, it's more in the public zeitgeist or whatever, and becoming narrators are being able to make, bigger names for themselves just on the back of audiobooks. Not alone. I know there's a ton of marketing and everything that you're doing, like in your own spheres to publicize yourselves. But it's great to see common recognition for that, and it's losing the stigma of not really reading, which is nonsense. And I think because of that, it's sort of creating a double-edged sword, because more celebrities are getting involved and more authors are wanting to read their own books, which is not the route we love to go. But on the other side of that, when I put on my directorial hat, it's very, very thrilling for me to get to work with some of the people that I have been getting to work with that are kind of big names. And it gives me a little bit of a confidence boost as a director to get their feedback about how I'm impacting their work in a way that they didn't expect, and these are seasoned professional celebrities. And so that's very gratifying and exciting for me personally. Blackstone as a whole is doing nothing but growing, and there's, hands in so many pies, and we're producing and acquiring just some really magnificent, really beautiful titles. And the joy for me is getting to tell stories, and I don't read them aloud, but I get to have a hand in like ushering them along. And because of the growth, because of the boom, we're acquiring a lot more diverse stories, a lot more books from the BIPOC community and from the LGBTQ community, and being able to, in this way, in this very literary, meaningful way, I get to help those stories find the right voice. And it's just joyous. And when I get to work with an author and they just said, this is perfect, these are the voices, it's gratifying to me, because I got to propose the cast list, but I love being able to uphold these people in the community that are reading their freaking hearts out. And so yeah, that's what's exciting for me.
That is all so delightful. And we try to keep these episodes like short and sweet, but I have to ask a follow-up because you dropped such a juicy tidbit about the meaningful role of you as a director. And so I'm wondering if, without naming any names, can you share a story of a moment that you directed or tweaked that enhanced the audiobook?
I was working about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I don't know. Time is meaningless at this point. And he had been signed on to read this very odd, quirky little book for us called The Caretaker. It's like a 4-hour long book about this old man who owns this weird museum of like nostalgia, sort of. And but the writing was pretty unique, and there was just these paragraphs that were just endless and sort of meandering. And at one point, I don't know what I'm doing right now. And we got to sit there for about 30 minutes and we parsed through the text. And doing that with somebody of his caliber and being able to like stay and track the conversation was a pat on the back for me. And but it also kind of brought to the front the idea that everybody that works in this business knows how to tell stories, and nobody is isolated or insulated by their own personal relationship with the book. So being able to bounce ideas off of one another or be able to workshop a short story with somebody is really fun, because you can, especially short stories, you can look at them from so many different angles and so many different approaches. And being able to do that with people that I have admired my whole life is just one of those, is this my life for real sorts of feelings.
That's so cool. I've always said that short stories are literary boxes of chocolate.
Like, that's
they are
delightful.
just so rich and creamy and amazing. And I just want to sink my teeth into them. I love short stories.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful way to put it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now you and I need to follow that up. Jennifer, can we live up to it? It is your turn to answer. Okay. What is exciting you about the craft right now today?
Yes, absolutely. So my daughter is taking her college psychology 101 class right now, and she had a homework assignment last night that she needed to interview someone who uses psychology in their work. And she turns to me and she said, "Mom, you do, right?" And at first it sort of took me aback, like, I'm not a therapist. I don't. And then I was like, wait a minute. I analyze the motivations and the mental state and the emotional state of every single one of my characters. And that then led to a really in-depth discussion with her about the psychology of character acting in audiobooks. And it was just fascinating. And it has been replaying in my mind since then. And it really puts my prep work into a new light, using psychological things and psychological analysis of the characters in my work. And I just am definitely digging into that right now.
That's so cool. I feel like that conversation with your daughter could be one of our podcast episodes. I want to hear.
It's really interesting.
What is exciting me about the craft right now today is that it is an absurd, insane undertaking that no one can fully achieve. Like, to narrate an audiobook, the number of things we're aiming to do, like showing up to the moment authentically and bringing all of these different characters to life and, living in them, even though we're just one person. And, in most other acting crafts, we only need to prepare one character. And the, incredibly tight timelines we have for prep and accents and dialects, that it's just an impossible mountain to climb. And that used to really depress me. Like, how will I ever be good at this insane thing? And then I shifted my viewpoint to wow, isn't this beautiful that the craft of audiobooks is this journey that the sojourn that never ends. So that's what's exciting me today.
I love that. I love both of those things so much. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. With yours, Sarah, I very much relate to that so much. I mean, there will never be a perfect audiobook. And even if it's one person's quote unquote perfect audiobook, someone else is going to hear it differently. Sort of like Jesse said earlier about, there are those surprising takes on this material. And, one narrator's version of a book is going to be different than another narrator's. And it is a craft. It is all subjective and gorgeous because of it. That's awesome.
Well, this has been a delicious conversation. Thank you so much, Jesse, for being here with us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It's been delightful.
Agreed.
Thanks so much for listening to Crafting Audiobooks. We've been your hosts, Sarah Beth Goer
and Jennifer Jill Araya.
Wishing you happy audiobook listening and/or crafting.
Bye for now.